Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Our Stories, His Glory. I am so glad you're joining us this week. As I promised, threatened, whatever the case might be, it's going to be a special edition. I don't know how special it'll be by the end of this thing, but it's been recommended to me that I get to be the one to ask all the questions and I get to find out a lot about people and I get to hide behind all that and don't have to answer them and get put on the hot seat myself. So if you'll remember last week, I had Mike Linch, good friend of mine who does the podcast Lynch with the Leader. And Mike has agreed to come on today and turn the table, so to speak, and ask me the questions. Mike, it's good to have you this week.
Coach, it is great to be back on the other side of the table. I like the other side of the table better than the one you had me in last week.
And I agree with you. I'd rather be on your side of the table. There's pressure. It's easy to come up with question answers are the tough part. So as of this moment, I'm turning this thing over to you, Mike, and here I am and sitting in this warm seat here.
I love it. I love it. Normally at this segment I would go, Coach, welcome to the Lynch with the Leader podcast. But I'm going to say, Coach, welcome to the Our Stories, His Glory podcast on Facebook. Man, how does it feel to be sitting in a place that you're going, all right, I've got a brand new future in front of me. You spent all those years in baseball. How does it feel not having the baseball title over you right now?
Well, I think I had done a lot of research before I made that announcement of retirement. I had known for a few years that, the end was around the corner, but I didn't know exactly when. But I had talked to a lot of other coaches, and I'd gotten mixed reaction from some of the coaches who had gone into retirement, and some would say, hey, it's going to kill you. You're going to miss it. You're going to have to get away from it because it'll drive you crazy not being out there. But then I had others say, hey, the number one emotion you're going to feel the next day after it's over is relief. And it's because all that pressure, and we're not talking about the pressure of winning and losing a baseball game, the pressure of being a Division I baseball coach is lifted from you, and you're going to walk lighter, you're going to breathe easier, you're going to do things you never got to do before. And Mike, that has been the case with me. Now, yes, I miss my players, I miss those coaches, I miss the camaraderie, and of course I still love the sport. Just because I'm not coaching doesn't mean I'm not a fan of baseball, but I feel great. I feel like I did 33 years of something that I really enjoyed, and God had a lot of things still in mind for me that being a baseball coach kind of confined me that I wasn't able to do. And I've started doing those things since then, and I couldn't be more blessed since the day I hung up, played my last game, coached my last game, and it was time, and I'm happy and I'm blessed and ready for the next day.
If I could have gone back, and I know your mom and dad are avid listeners of your show, and I hope they're getting to take all this in today. If I could go back to little Rusty growing up in Cherryville, North Carolina, what would words be that would have described you then?
Well,
how would somebody that knew you then describe you?
Well, my mom and dad would probably be the best ones to ask that, but I look back now, and we were sitting down around the table not long ago going over some cards and letters and things that I had done when I was little that Mom had found in the attic and in drawers and places. And I think I was quite the character, Mike. I think I was a good kid. I didn't get in trouble. I think I got in a little bit of mischief, but I think they would have told you that that I tried to have a sense of humor. I tried to like everybody. I tried to get along with everybody. I went to church and did the right things, but I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do in life. But I can tell you, and they would tell you, I kind of knew from the time I was 6 years old it was going to have something to do with baseball. And
wow.
I played all sports in Cherryville, North Carolina growing up. You could play football in the fall, basketball in the winter, and baseball in the spring and summer. And there was no such thing as travel ball. And I did all that, and I loved all that. I loved school. I think my parents would vouch for me on that. And I love being a part of the community because Cherryville is a community. Cherryville High School represented the town, and I was so proud to represent my community on a ball field and in the school. And I feel like for the most part, I did what I thought was right. But like any person that grows up making their own choices, I didn't make any terrible choices along the way, but I was a prodigal in some ways in terms of searching for what I wanted to be till I was about 20 years old. And I made some professions when I was 12 and again when I was 14. But about 20 years old, I really decided to get serious about my faith in the Lord.
When you go back and you look at what that town meant to you, what you were raised to be, what were things your parents poured into you, Coach, that helped make you into the person you are today?
Well, the first thing I'll tell you about my parents and my family was I saw a solid, steady, loving couple, a marriage. And from the very beginning, I can remember at a very early age saying, I want to grow up and I want to get married and I want to be like my parents in that respect. We were involved. We weren't just at church. We were involved in church. And my parents had a very strong faith and they passed that along to us. They were not legalistic and they weren't overbearing about it. My brother and I, he was older than me, were allowed to make our own choices, but they were always there for me. And, I just saw their affection for each other. They disagreed like any couple, but I'd see them hug and I would see them, and I thought, that's what I want one day. And my wife now, she'll say, why do you have to hug me 15 times a day? And I was like, well, because I think I saw my dad hugging my mom and, things like that. But they were a tremendous influence on me, positive one. And I can't thank them enough and the Lord enough for me having the stability that I had in childhood. I don't have one of those terrible childhood stories where you stray and, you have a terrible experience and you find the Lord in your 20s and then you're this miracle. My miracle started from birth because I was born and raised in a stable home.
You fall in love with the game of baseball at the age of 6. You have an incredible Hall of Fame high school career and going to play at Appalachian State. What was that experience like, transitioning from a small town to going to Boone to play at Appy State? What was that transition like for you?
I was ecstatic to go to App State, and there's a little known story. Well, people in my hometown know this, but I didn't go to App State out of high school. I got an appointment my senior year in high school to go to the United States Military Academy at West Point. And I actually went in June of 1982, and I realized I did a lot of soul searching and prayer while I was there, and I realized that wasn't where I was supposed to be. And so I got released from my commitment there and came home. And a week before everybody was going off to college, I had nowhere to go. I had nowhere to go to college. And one of my best friends had me ride with him to Appalachian because he was going to be playing football and baseball. And I just happened to meet the baseball coach who said, hey, I remember you. I got a dorm spot. I got a spot on this team. And that's how I ended up at Appalachian. I was the most appreciative Appalachian State Mountaineer on campus. And I had grown up pulling for Western Carolina because my brother went there. And that was the big rival. But those years were great for me. I really, by my sophomore year, got involved in InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. I was ecstatic to be a member of Division I baseball team and had some success as a team. We went to the regionals twice. But I loved my classes, Mike. I loved being a history major and a social science major, and I teach sociology now. And the classes were hard and challenging, but I loved it, and I loved being a member of that baseball team representing App State. And I met my wife my junior year and finally was smart enough to start dating her my senior year and got married right after college. So I can't say enough good things about what App State did for me.
Is that where you began to think maybe one day I might be a coach? Where did the whole coaching bug bite you? Where did that come in for you?
It came in. I didn't really think about that. And I was really more into, I was ready to be a teacher. And I got hired at Mooresville Junior High back when you had junior highs. Right out of college. I graduated actually in December after my student teaching. I got hired in January. The first day I was in the cafeteria, in the faculty lounge, I guess it was, in the cafeteria, this coach comes up to me and says, hey, I heard you played baseball in college. And I said, yeah. He goes, well, I'm the baseball coach here for the 7th and 8th grade team, and I don't want to do it anymore. You're going to do it. And he handed me a key and said, this is the key to the equipment room. And I said, are you sure? And he said, principal's already said, I'm handing you the key. I never really thought about coaching until that day, and I poured myself into those kids. And he had told me, not that I was a miracle worker, but he said, look, I'm a football coach. They made me do this. Here's the good news. The good news, the bad news is we finished last place last year. And the good news is none of those kids are back. So he said, good luck.
Great.
And I went out there just expecting the bad news Bears, but they had some talent, Mike, and we ended up winning the little championship that year. And once we did, I was hooked. I wanted to be a coach. And so I remember those guys fondly.
You know, when you got into the college coaching world, and I know you had some short stints as an assistant coach, and then you began your career leading, 3 decades at Gardner-Webb, Lander, Brevard, North Greenville, and, man, of course, your time at Gardner-Webb, the lengthy time there at Gardner-Webb. As you look back on that, Coach, and you look back on that time in college baseball, what is it about being a college baseball coach most people would never understand? You mentioned earlier you miss the game, but you don't miss the pressure. What are things college coaches go through? The average person that sits in the bleachers, they just wouldn't know. They wouldn't understand.
As a college coach, you are the surrogate parent for 35 young men. And their parents, at Division I baseball, some coaches have more than that, some have less. But college baseball coaches typically have 35 players whose parents have dropped them off and say, he's yours. And you are the surrogate parent. So if anything goes wrong with one of them, it affects me. I've heard people say before, as a parent, you can only be as happy as your least happy child. And I think about that as a parent, and that's true. Well, that's true about your team too. I mean, if 34 of them are doing great and one is struggling, then I'm struggling. And what people, don't realize is that is a 24/7, and it's very, very little of the interactions that I had with my players in all those years really were directly involved with baseball. I go through the locker room and you can kind of tell who's had a rough day. You can kind of tell who's had a great day, and you got to pay some attention to that. You get to pay some attention to that. So I think that's one thing. And I think the other misconception that people wouldn't really think of much is how close our competitors are. And you do the Zoom study, a great job with that on Monday morning with anywhere from 50 to 80 of us. And a lot of those guys, boy, I went at it tooth and nail with during the game. I mean, we were trying to kill each other, and we're best friends. And people think we're all out to kill each other. And yeah, because we're recruiting against each other, we're playing against each other. And then they see us hug as we're shaking hands after the game, and they don't realize that we're brothers. We fight like brothers, but we really are. So some of my closest relationships are with my players and assistant coaches, but also, Mike, with the competitors that I competed against.
You talked about coming to know Christ really at the age of 20 when it really cemented in and being involved there at InterVarsity there at Appalachian State. How did your faith, Coach, influence the type of coach you wanted to be?
Well, I think I knew from the very beginning that being a coach was a great gift and a great responsibility. And the last thing that I wanted to do, and I feel very fortunate that I knew this at the age of 23 when I got my first head coaching job at a high school, is that I wanted to be a positive influence on those kids and to try to be salt and light and shine God's light into them. And you can do that without preaching and Bible thump. You can do it with the way you live your life. I wanted to be a great husband and a good father and a good role model to those guys so that someday they would say, man, I want to be like Coach Stroupe. Now, I failed in that at times like any coach has, and not every kid who ever played for me has a great taste in their mouth of that time because some didn't get to play as much as they wanted to and other things. But for the most part, I knew at an early age that it wasn't about me. And it wasn't about wins and losses. Yes, I competed. Oh boy, I competed. But I think I got every year that passed, I became more aware of the eternal impact that I could potentially have on these young men. And that's what drove me all those years.
And I know in that coaching world, when you mentioned it, man, there's some tight guys and through ABCA, and there's some great clinics. Who were some coaches that lived it spiritually that you went, not only are they an incredible baseball coach, but man, they live out their faith, and I want to be like them. I want to model after them. Were there any guys like that stood out to you that you modeled yourself after?
I went to hear an award ceremony back in 1990, I think it was, and Mike Fox was at North Carolina Wesleyan at the time and had won the national championship, and he got some big award, and all he could talk about was his faith in the Lord. And right away I said, that's the kind of coach and the kind of person that I want to be. And so through the years, I followed Mike. I was ecstatic when he got hired at the University of North Carolina, and he just retired last week. And we had a growing bet about which one was going to last the longest, and he lasted a little longer than me. But he was a great role model to me. I met Keith Madison by phone because I called him. He was a reference for an assistant coach that didn't end up coming to Gardner Webb because he got a better opportunity. But 2 minutes into talking to Keith Madison, I realized, you realize his faith because he wears it. And right away, he became a very strong role model to me. And then I don't want to segue into that Kendall Award, but I got to tell you, Jerry Kendall is one of the finest human beings to ever live and has passed away now. And that award is perfectly named after him. And I was honored enough to receive it in 2013. But those were some. But then when I look at guys I competed against, Dave Jarvis at Belmont was a strong Christian man, and we had lots of good talks. Rich Maloney has become one of my closest confidants and friends. Kermit Smith at Appalachian, who's younger than me, but we have mutual admiration for each other. So I can't say at any one point in time that one person was that one. It was just different people at different times who I really tried to emulate and to live out my faith the way they did.
You know what I love about that is, and we talked about it in our Bible study this morning, we expect to see faith some places, but some other places we don't expect to see it. One of the places we don't expect to see it is two guys exchanging a lineup card. We just don't think of it. And, man, there are so many men that you mentioned that live out their faith so well, and they don't see themselves as just a baseball coach. They truly see themselves as a minister who happens to be a baseball coach. And a lot of those guys you named, Jerry Kendall being, really the forefront there. We played against him when I was in college, and he came to our team room and shared his testimony, and it was just powerful. What did it mean to you in 2013 when you received the Jerry Kendall Character Award from FCA? What did that mean for you?
Well, it was the greatest award that I had received in my lifetime. I won't say it's the greatest thing that's happened to me because there's things above that. But when you're talking about personal awards, I think the reason it meant so much to me is because of how humbled and unworthy you feel. And I got in that room in Chicago, and my parents were there, and my wife and two of my sons were able to make it. And there on the front row was Jerry Kendall. In the front table was Jerry Kendall, Keith Madison, Ron Polk, and Mark Johnson, who was at Texas A&M at the time. And that was my Mount Rushmore. I mean, those were the guys that were on my Mount Rushmore, and they were sitting there looking at me, wanting to hear what I had to say because I gave a little speech. I just feel like, and I've said it on the show when Rich Maloney and I talked about this a little, or Keith Madison. It was a huge honor, and Mike, it immediately became a huge responsibility. I would never want to do anything in my life to bring the prestige of that award one notch lower than it is. And so when you're talking about, coaches, and I think back of in my Brevard days, my closest coaching friend was Darren Chaplin, who was over at Montreat College. We spent many hours together riding and talking about our faith, our family, and baseball. and everything. And I remember one time there was a recruit that had come to a tryout. We both kept him afterwards, and I spent about 15 or 20 minutes telling the kid why he should go to Montreat, and Darren Chaplin spent about 15 or 20 telling him why he should come to Brevard to play for me. And the dad just looked at us both and said, "Are y'all too crazy?" And we said, we have so much respect for each other and what we're doing. And when you say, people don't expect that of the coaches, it's a little different now because I'm an ordained pastor, and people kind of expect pastors to uphold, those standards. But when I was a coach, there were people who actually would be surprised at times about your faith. And wow, I didn't know that. Of course, when you got, reverend in front of your title, and you're a pastor as well, people kind of know right away what you're supposed to stand for. But as coaches, I think you have that extra opportunity to influence above and beyond the sport.
That is so true. And Coach, you have done that so well and did it successfully. I mean, you have done it incredibly successfully all these years. How in the world, but I know this, baseball didn't hold a candle to your family. How did you be so successful? How could you be so successful in the game while still being a success at home? How'd you do that?
Well, I don't know that I always was a success at home. I think Karen Stroupe probably would have the same theory that Ruth Graham did. And I think her famous quote was, "I never considered divorce. Murder maybe, but never divorce." A coach has to have a very strong family, or in some cases, a coach won't have a family anymore, a family that understands. And ironically, Mike, none of my three boys really picked up the torch for baseball. When my oldest one, my middle one played a little bit in high school. My middle one played all the way through his senior year, but they were wrestlers and they were really good at it. And the one thing that I was able to do that I think really helped me, especially after I got to Gardner Webb, was I was able to hire really good assistant coaches to be on the road most of the time doing the recruiting. And I was able to schedule and structure things on daily at the office where I could leave and go to the elementary school when they had a play or a performance or a special event. And the only time I missed any of those is if I was actually on the road coaching. I tried not to leave. I tried to stay pretty close by with recruiting the way we divvied it up. So I tried to make some sacrifices along the way. I know my family had to make them, and I could have done more to try to get that next great player or go to that next clinic to learn more. But I felt like I made a pretty good balance of it. And when you talk about a marriage, and I've mentioned before about my parents being such a good role model for me on that, I'll just throw in a quick piece of marriage advice for anybody that's listening. I was told and had heard while Karen and I were engaged that, the way to have a successful marriage was to do the 60-40 principle. Give 60% and only expect 40%. And I got to tell you, that is the worst piece of advice that I've ever been given, because here's why. Here's why I think that. It implies that there's a scoreboard. And the first thing you have to do to have a successful marriage is get rid of the scoreboard. You can't keep score and say, well, I did this, you need to do that. If you go by the 60-40, there may be times in your marriage when you have to give 90% because your spouse is sick or ill or can't function, and you have to do that. Or there may be times when I can only give 10% and she has to give 90%. And if you're keeping score, it's going to get frustrating. So throw out the scoreboard, throw out the 60-40, and look at it more as a partnership, a covenant. And God doesn't break his covenant, so we don't break ours. It's a covenant, a commitment when you feel like it and when you don't. And that will last a whole lot longer. I know one coach right now who is a good friend of mine, and his wife had started in the stages of Alzheimer's very early, and earlier than normal, like in her 60s. And he takes care of her full time now. She's not. There are days I think when he posts on Twitter, she really doesn't know what's going on. He's given 100%. If he was keeping score at 60-40, well, he would have been out of there. But he is, and he even says he's honored and blessed to be the caregiver. Now that's what a marriage is about. And your question was, how did we survive all these years as a baseball family? But I think that's really what it is. You give, and you give, and what you receive is not your main priority. But of course, when you give, you do receive.
Any regrets as you look back now in the rearview mirror and you look back on those days, parenting and trying to balance all of that, and being married? Any regrets?
No, I don't regret. I think I spent a lot of time with my boys. I've spent a lot of time playing with them. I don't have a regret. I wish I would have been mature enough from the very beginning to be more mature about what a husband exactly was supposed to do. I kind of think I thought that I was being a great husband if I was being the best coach I could and earning us a living and getting us at a higher level each time financially or whatever. And that was I don't think I failed in that, but I think now I see a whole lot clearer than I did back then. But Mike, I do have when I was at the convention a few years ago and we were on a panel and all the young coaches came and they wanted a couple of veteran coaches. I can't believe they wanted me, but one guy asked me that. He said, if you could do anything different, what would you do? And immediately, here's what comes to my mind. I was a high school baseball coach at West Henderson High School, and I decided to go back. I was going to go back. I had the itch to coach in college, and I was going to go back to Appalachian to be an assistant. And I specifically remember now not really praying about that. I was so certain that was the right thing to do. And if I had to do it over in the spring of 1989, I would get on my knees every night and say, Lord, do you want me to give up this high school teaching job and coaching job to go pursue this and basically be a graduate assistant at Appalachian State? Is this what you want me to do to my family, which at the time was just me and my wife? But I was so sure that was the right thing to do and that, I was going to be a college baseball coach. I don't think I committed that to the Lord, and there were some hardships because of that. But in His way, God turned it and made it a great blessing as well. But I think I would be more intentional about being prayerful during that time in my life.
What would you tell young coaches that have aspirations and they've started it and they're looking for a bigger opportunity and wanting to change and grow? What's a challenge you would give to them?
I would tell them a bigger opportunity may not be a higher level of baseball. One of the things that bothered me the most, and I spoke about this when I was able to be a speaker at the convention that year in front of the big crowd, was there used to be this thing, they still hear it now, called big leaguing, where there's this pecking order in baseball. There's the pros, then there's the college Division I coaches, then there's Division II, NAIA, junior college, and then there's high school coach, and then there's middle school. And it's almost like a step ladder. And I've seen people who were higher on that ladder treat people who were lower as if they were lower as humans. And I detested that. I just never, I've been in clinics before where there was a middle school or high school coach speaking, and I was a Division I coach, and I could not write fast enough what they were saying to keep the notes because I was learning so much. So here's what I would tell young coaches. Commit it to the Lord. If you're not a man of faith, become a man of faith. And the Lord will take care of you if you're seeking to honor Him. And that might mean you become a Division I head coach or a pro manager or something one day. But don't pursue that. Don't pursue that pecking order. Don't pursue that prestige or status, because that'll wear off real quick. Pursue the Lord, and He will place you where you'll be the most blessed if you put Him first.
Boy, that's good. That is a good word right there. And if you're able to figure that out, it just keeps you off so many paths that you're going to be glad you didn't go down. That is a really good word. And I know that influence over men is a big deal to you. You wrote a book a couple of years ago about the top 10 ways to be a man in God's eyes. You in your first chapter, and I love this, I want to hear your thoughts on this. Your chapter 1 says, if it slows you down, lay it down, out of Hebrews, on throwing off everything that entangles us. What are some things through the years that have slowed you down?
Well, I think,
that you go, man, these are things I have to continually throw off?
yeah, I think a couple that come to mind right away, and I don't remember exactly what I wrote in that first chapter, but I do remember that being the first chapter. But I think pride,
Mm.
we got to get past our pride. And, when we're looking at what's happening in America today, so many people are offended by every little thing because of their pride, and they're spending all their time being offended instead of living. So that's one. Another thing is I think we got to lay down worrying about what other people think. I mean, we're so concerned about how other people perceive us and what they think of us and how they're reacting to us. And God says, really, we should be about the opposite. We should lay that down and only pursue Him and look forward instead of around us. And I think earthly pleasures, money is one. There's nothing wrong with money, and there's nothing wrong with finances. But when they become our pursuit, they're really weighing us down, and we're missing some opportunities to serve if we're spending our time and energy. Those are three that come to mind right away of about 100, really.
And you have so many great principles in that book. It is so good. I hope you'll link that on your Facebook, because guys need to pick this up. In your chapter 4, you said, do all that's required of you and then some. That is as coach can be. That 1%, you need to go 1% more. And you were talking about where Jesus compelled you. If he compels you to go 1 mile, Jesus said, go with him 2 miles. How has that worked in marriage? I want to talk about the marriage piece of this. How have you been able to do that? And how has your wife, Karen, been able to do that in your marriage to get you where you are today?
Well, I think she's probably done it better and more than I have, but I think it's a matter of seeing each day with that other person as a blessing and as a gift instead of a responsibility. Yes, there's responsibility with marriage. Yes, there's commitment. Yes, there has to be selflessness because you're acting as a couple instead of as an individual. But it's also a great blessing, a great source of joy. And when we talk about go that extra mile, you do things above and beyond that person's expectation, and they feel loved, and honestly, they want to do the same back for you. You get into you can get into a contest of who can do the most for each other, and those are good contests to get into because you're seeking to the joy of the other person. And I think that has sustained us. We have a compatibility where we a total trust in each other. We're very different. She's an introvert. No way you would get her to say a word on this show. And I'm very different. She's a person that likes quiet, gentle stillness. I like action, but we've made it work because of our deep respect and love for each other and that covenant that I mentioned earlier.
And that goes a long ways in athletics too. For coaches that are listening, for athletes that are listening, going that extra mile, doing that 1% more. When you saw players, coach, on the field that always did a little more than what you asked, what did it tell you about them?
Well, it told me about their desire for one to be successful. They were doing everything they were told and then some. That told me this person really wants to win. They're just not going through the motions. But it also told me about their character, and that tells me that once that game of baseball is over, the next thing they do in life, they're going to go above and beyond as well because they've disciplined themselves to do that. But Mike, you and I both know for every one that does that, there's about 5 that only do what you tell them to do and not an ounce more.
That's right.
And so that one that does above and beyond, I think also leads into the whole spiritual idea of that, go that extra mile, because if you're trying to win people for Christ, I really don't think you'll win them for Christ by hollering at them on the street corner and telling them that they're sinners. And there's there's a ministry for calling people out, but I just don't see people who are being mean to each other or being mean to non-believers by hollering at them, trying to scare them or bullying them into the kingdom. I just don't see that working so much. What I see is somebody getting unexpected kindness that you wouldn't expect. somebody that you say, well, a Christian would never help me because look what and then that Christian reaches out their hand and says, I love you no matter what. That's how you win people to the kingdom, by going that extra mile. And I think that's what Jesus was talking about.
I totally agree, and that's missing in our world, and it stands out. Whether you're a pastor, whether you're a professor, whether you're a coach, when you love with that kind of love Jesus loves with, it makes all the difference in the world. You know, I'm sure at the end of all your seasons leading on to Diamond, 29 of those as a head coach, and working into head coaching, assistant coaching, you always do end of the year player meetings where you evaluate the season and you evaluate how the players did. One day when you sit down with the Lord and you look back on your life, how do you pray He evaluates how you did with the gifts and abilities He gave you?
Well, I hope that, and I think each person probably hopes that they hear those words, well done, good and faithful servant. But to answer that question more broadly, I think God has given me the sense that, look, I've given you these desires, these passions, gifts, if you want to call them, for a reason, and they're not for you, they're for me. When I say for me, I'm saying God's talking to me.
Yeah.
And you tried your best. You did that. You tried to use your writing ability. You tried to use your speaking, your gift of gab that you got from your mom. You tried to use that. You tried to use your love of baseball, your love of family. Now, I will certainly say, and I think God will judge me as being imperfect. But man, the thing that I love the most about my faith in the Lord is that grace, by Him saying, you know what, you've made mistakes, but somebody else paid the price for those. I want to talk about the things you did as a faithful servant, not the things wrong, because those have been wiped out. So I hope that's the conversation that I get to have someday. And a man is. They say if you want to find out a man's true self-worth, look into the face of his wife. And I hope that her face will always be a smiling, joyful face and not one of pain. I hope that my sons, who make fun of me for all things all the time, Mike, and they're 27, 24, and 20, and I really love it when they pick on me. But I hope they would say, I grew up in a stable home, which is what I told you that I did. That my dad didn't drink, he didn't smoke, he didn't curse. He tried to do the right thing. He tried to instill the right things in us. He loved our mom, and he taught us how to be men imperfectly, but he at least tried his best to do the right things to provide for us, not just financially and not just physically, but spiritually as well.
I love that, Coach, and I want to say that you and I only know each other through a screen.
Right,
we have somehow never met, which is amazing, because we've missed each other by a year in so many places. But you, at the end of every episode, and when I'm doing my outro, I always think of a word that describes the person that I've interviewed. And I think the word that God has gifted you with, that I think you use so well, is you have the gift of encouragement. And I have a feeling that whether I was in Cherryville, North Carolina, or walking on the campus at Gardner-Webb, or at the university now you're being a professor in, or in the den of your home, I think Coach Stroupe is using the gift of encouragement and using it really well. Well done. You're a good one, Coach, and it's been an honor to be able to sit down with you, fella. So now hot seat's over. I get to turn it back over to you to wrap this thing up.
Well, I wish I had 40 minutes to ask you a bunch of questions again, but I appreciate that, Mike, and I have a lot of respect for you and just truly enjoy listening to your podcast with different leaders and different folks, and I hope you'll continue to do that because it's very inspirational and encouraging to all of us. And yes, I do feel like God has put me here to encourage others. And I hope my players and my family and the people that I know and love would say that I do my best to try to encourage them. But I always throw back in imperfectly because I never want to think I've arrived. I got a long way to go in a lot of areas. But I'm going to stay in good touch with you because I appreciate and admire what you're doing, and I hope that we will continue to see each other on video on Monday mornings, but I hope we get a chance to connect at sometime in real life. And if COVID's over, we might be able to even shake hands.
I will look forward to that day, Coach.
Okay.
I will look forward to that day. Thank you for the honor.
Yes, and what we'll do now, Mike, is I'll let you hang up, and I'll kind of tell them about what's going to be happening in the next few weeks with Our Stories, His Glory. But I appreciate you being here with me today.
Great. Thank you, Coach. Have a great one.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so you heard Mike Linch today, and again, he turned the tables on me, and I enjoyed getting to do that. I didn't really know what he was going to ask, and so that can be interesting at times. He gave me that same right last week to ask him whatever. He said nothing's out of bounds, and he threw some things at me. So I hope you enjoyed hearing that. Our Stories, His Glory is going to be changing a little bit some in the next few weeks. I go back to teaching full-time starting next Monday, and Monday's a really busy day for me from now on, so I think I'm going to move things to Tuesday, and I'm looking at the possibility of doing Our Stories, His Glory every other week, maybe once every 2 weeks, just so I can try to get a high-quality situation put together each week. But so I will have one this coming next Tuesday, which will be 8 days from now. And that is if the Lord is willing and the creek don't rise. I'll be back with Our Stories, His Glory, and I pray that you will be highly blessed.